Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 15th of May 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Afternoon.
Also with us in the studio behind the technical desk, Nick Green, and distance north of the border, we've got David Scott, who I'm pleased to say is going to stay with us through the whole programme. Now, we are sometimes a little bit neglectful of the weather there in Scotland, but we've had a report from David that it's not too bad. That means it's cloudy and dry in Perth at least, and presumably if it's dry in Perth, it will be dry elsewhere in Scotland. Meanwhile, we've got a variety of weather across UK. We have got sunny on the eastern borders of Manchester, a bit of sunshine in Glasgow even, and I'm missing Rhondda or somewhere in Wales. I think it was quite reasonable as well. Apologies, that seems to have just dropped off the monitor. Well, what are we going to begin with today? We'd like to give you an update on the appalling case of child abuse victim and whistleblower Melanie Shaw. This was the lady that had the courage to step forward a couple of years ago to say she had been abused, not only at home as a very, very young child, but then following her time in the so-called care system of Nottingham's children homes. And the home she referred to was Beechwood. She talked about the children there being abused. The subsequent police investigation by Nottinghamshire Police Operation Daybreak was then to claim that some 150 children had been abused, and their investigation supposedly then moved on to another 6 homes. Since then, there's been utter silence on the progress, but Melanie's been incarcerated in prison. She's still in HM Prison Peterborough, and the latest is that we believe that the court system is now attempting to section her. We'll just bring an image on screen to remind people. This is Melanie Shaw in her happier days. This is the lady as she really is. But of course, at the moment, she's in profit-making Sodexo Prison Peterborough. She is able to get letters out. She is receiving some letters, but the latest communication we've had from her is that she believes most of the incoming letters are severely restricted or censored. Now, what's happened is that Melanie's been back into court. She's been charged with false imprisonment, and that is of a paramedic who went to assist her a few months ago. At this time, Melanie was in a very difficult situation because she should have been receiving assistance from Nottingham social services and mental health teams, but no help was given. And whatever took place on that day, we are now being led to understand in court that Melanie has pleaded guilty to that false imprisonment. And at the moment, there are now attempts to have a psychiatric assessment on her, strangely enough, by the same psychiatrist who was used to make a judgment on her during her last court hearing. The significance of this is that, of course, Melanie has had her own psychiatrist for many years, and that gentleman has simply been brushed under the carpet. So her long-standing psychiatrist, a very good man, has not been allowed to give opinion into the court. I'll hand over to you, if I may, David. Just straight off, what's your thoughts on that situation?
Yes, the tendency for the state to use psychiatric services to marginalise people who are saying awkward things is something we see quite a lot. It is reminiscent of Soviet practice. There was an official Soviet Union book on mental problems, mental illnesses, equivalent to the DSM-5 that we have here. And they actually had a recognised illness, which was called denying the obvious achievements of the Soviet Union. So if you said that, in fact, everything in the garden was not rosy, you were by definition insane. And they used this technique to marginalise and eliminate from public discourse any voices that were not on programme. So here we see in England something similar being deployed against whistleblowers for child sexual abuse. And of course, Anne Gregg in Aberdeen had exactly the same number pulled on her. She was sectioned at one point, and then when she got out, had a full examination from a recognised expert in the field, and was given a completely clean bill of health. But even to this day, the fact that she was briefly sectioned is used against her, used to discredit what she's saying. There were a large number of attempts to section Robert Greene, but of course they couldn't find a single psychiatrist in Scotland who could pronounce Robert anything other than sane. So that failed. But they did keep trying. I mean, he must have had 4 or 5 examinations at various times from assorted psychiatrists organised by the police. At least 3 separate ones the last time he was in HMP Perth. So we're seeing this used as a weapon, and we're seeing it used to discredit the truth.
Well, that's a very interesting comment. What I can say factually is that, of course, the UK column has been dealing with a number of ladies over the past few years. They've all reported child abuse or paedophile activity, and then, as you're describing, subsequently they've been incarcerated in psychiatric units. So the link seems to be that if you stand up to report the abuse of children, certainly if you report organised paedophile rings, then one of the actions of the state is to try and brand you mentally ill and put you in a psychiatric unit. Now, we'll follow along on this particular line of subject, but somebody has just asked, what exactly is the legal team doing for Melanie Shaw? Well, the report that I've had early this morning is that essentially we now have a new legal team that's helping her. It previously was a company called VHS Fletchers. Melanie sacked that company because she was not happy with their performance. And also she alleged that they had provided an unqualified person to represent her as if they were a solicitor. What I also understand from the briefing this morning is that the new legal team, we have no evidence that they were actually appointed by Melanie herself. We believe it's quite possible that they were handed the case by VHS Fletchers. But what we can tell you with 100% accuracy is that the lady who Melanie has consistently nominated to be her Mackenzie friend and lay legal advisor and to be with her in court, that lady has consistently been blocked from 1, being in contact with Melanie, and 2, appearing in court alongside Melanie. So not only has that lady been blocked by the legal team, she has of course been blocked by the judges themselves, who seem to only approve of paid legal teams coming into court. So we're waiting for more information. It's very difficult to get more information on the case around Melanie Shaw because there's a complete close down around her. We can't get into the prison to talk with her. The prison indeed will not communicate with many people on the status of Melanie Shaw. The legal teams are blocking anybody else assisting her, and we're now deeply concerned that a gentleman who was brought in at very short notice to assess Melanie the last time she was in prison is now being brought forward by the courts to assess her again. And it's been alleged that this particular psychiatrist who runs his own psychiatric unit wants Melanie to attend in a residential capacity with him before he assesses her. Now, one could say that this represents at least some form of conflict of interest, or vested interest, I think is the correct term, but we'll have to wait for more information on that. The minimum we can say is that this very, very brave lady has not been protected and nurtured for talking about her abuse and that of other children. David Cameron's vicious Conservative state, supported of course by Alison Saunders, head of the Crown Prosecution Service, is continuing to persecute her. Now, David, you brought up a very interesting article which appeared on the Alice Through the Looking Glass website, talking about protection for public officials. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, this is an example of a lack of the rule of law. The basic principle of the rule of law is whatever laws apply equally to everybody, and there are no privileged positions or privileged people. More and more, we're seeing that that's not the case. This Alice Through the Looking Glass blog post here highlights the fact that I think it's the 1933 Act, which defines child abuse and neglect, applies to parents and carers and the general public. It does not apply to any state official. If a state official commits the same acts, they can't be prosecuted under that act. They might be prosecuted via a private civil prosecution for breach of duty of care, but they cannot be prosecuted under this act via the criminal courts. So they are protected. And this is one of many cases. The harassment acts that are being used to silence so many people, silence Robert Greene, for example, the harassment acts, almost the first thing it says when you open the act, is that all government officials are exempt. It doesn't apply to them. So what we're seeing here again and again is there are two laws, one for them, one for us.
And if you cause trouble or upset the leaders, in inverted commas, then we now know that psychiatric units can be used to put you back on the right path. Well, just since you've mentioned Robert Greene, I understand that there's been some rather interesting events north of the border and an attempt to shut down another one of the blogs that's been calling for justice for Holly Greig. Can you give us an update on that?
Yes, it's very concerning. We're seeing quite a lot of police activity that's very strange, and it doesn't seem to have any basis. There's a blog which was very popular called Holly Greig Justice. It had 500,000 views worldwide. It was being picked up by a lot of other parties, and it was recording essentially information on child sexual abuse, on the investigation of child sexual abuse and on its cover-up. And it covered the Holly Greig, Robert Greene case, but a lot else besides, and was largely reposting information from the mainstream press and from alternative media. Police Scotland contacted Google and demanded within 5 days the IP address of the blogger. This caused obviously a great deal of alarm to the blogger, who's wondering what exactly Police Scotland are up to. And we still don't really know why Police Scotland have taken this action. There's also a gentleman who has put forward a motion to the Scottish Parliament Petitions Committee, requiring that any government state official who is aware of child sexual abuse must, under force of law, report that. And he has also been campaigning actively for Holly Greig and for Robert Greene. And Police Scotland arrived at his mother's door looking for him not very long ago, and saying that they were very concerned about some email he had sent. So Police Scotland seem to be taking a minute interest in anyone who is campaigning for Holly Greig or for Robert Greene or against child sexual abuse. And that does seem odd, and we don't really know what's going on there.
Well, thank you, David. Perhaps it's easier for me to make some comment on that from a position south of the border. But it just seems to me that if we analyse Scotland, we've got this total lack of separation of powers. That was bad enough while you had more than one political party active. And now, of course, we've essentially got combined political system, judicial system, and the police. And Scotland is now virtually in a one-party state situation. That party intimately connected with Alex Salmond. It's already been shown that Alex Salmond's personal office either lost or deliberately covered up documents to obfuscate the Holly Greig case. It seems logical to me that the SNP would now be very worried that if the truth about the rape and abuse of Holly Greig was to come to the surface, it would, of course, destroy the whole of the SNP plans for the future of Scotland. That's just my opinion as an Englishman, but that's how I see it. But let's just move on, if we may, to this very, very interesting document which you've sent through, which is a covenant, child protection covenant. I can just bring part of this up on screen, and we'll then come back to it because I can expand the text. This is to get public officials, I believe, to declare whether they are prepared to take action to help expose the abuse of children in a ritualistic environment. Again, over to you.
Yes, I'll just read it out, if I may. This has been put forward it's originated in Scotland, and it's been put forward with the view that we'll use it all across the UK to establish whether or not MPs and other officials, heads of charities, heads of churches, are actually willing to stand up and be counted on the subject of child abuse in all of its forms. But it's not very long. I'll read it out to you. It says, Child Protection Covenant. Child sexual abuse, Satanist ritual abuse, and the grooming of children for sex have no place in a peaceful, civilised society governed by the rule of law. I pledge to take the following action to protect the innocent from the predations of those who would cruelly abuse them. 1. Accept no excuses or delay from any public servant or state official who has a duty to protect children and is failing to fulfil that responsibility. 2. To demand a full explanation of any case where a state official or public servant appears to have failed in his or her duty to protect children from abuse or has failed to investigate and prosecute the perpetrators of such abuse. 3. Call publicly for the resignation of the responsible state officials and public servants in cases where no adequate reasons are given for a failure to investigate and prosecute abuse. I take this action in light of the universal disgust felt by all right-thinking members of our society at the official concealment of these most heinous crimes. This cover-up has gone on for decades and continues today. I have therefore decided to take a personal and public stand and to make it my business to drive out this evil from our justice system, wherever it is found. I cannot do this alone and call upon others to make the same pledge, to be watchful for official misconduct, and metaphorically to hear the cries of those innocents who never drew breath, those who had the breath of life but never knew love, and those who struggle to find hope in a world disfigured by their suffering. So it's a pledge to essentially make sure that the judiciary, the police, the state in its various law enforcement forms does their job. Quite simply that.
I think it's an excellent document. I only saw it and read it early this morning, but I think it's wonderful. I think it surely must be a document that anybody who's concerned about the abuse of children should want to sign. I'm going to say I fully support it now. We'll help promulgate it. Let us know what you'd like to do over it, but we certainly need to do something. And I'm just going to add that there seems to be some rumours circulating that the UK column is no longer supporting the mother, her partner and the children in the Hampstead ritual abuse case. That is, of course, totally untrue. That family have the UK column's total support, and we will continue to support and dig for the truth of the Hampstead case. Now, before I hand over to Mike, who's going to have a look at devolution issues, just a quick one, if we may, which is that I understand that Lord Gill has used the election to quietly stand down in Scotland.
Yes, the head of the Scottish judiciary has resigned, and he chose election day to do it on. A good day for hiding bad news, I guess. This was a gentleman who, as I reported a few weeks ago, said, let's see now, threats to judicial independence do not always come with a knock on the door in the middle of the night. In a society that prides itself on independence of its judiciary, the threat may come in insidious ways, even at the hands of well-meaning governments and legislators, in the name of efficiency and, ironically, in the name of transparency. So in the name of transparency, Lord Gill resigned during the election campaign and seemed to resign very much on the spot. This is actually unprecedented. Normally what happens in Scotland is the next Lord President would be selected and announced, and there'd be a careful handover. None of that's happened. Lord Gill has just thrown up his hands and said, I'm not doing this anymore. essentially, I'm out of here. So he's, I think he's no longer in post now. There's somebody sort of holding the reins. He's officially leaving at the end of the month, so only 2 weeks away. And it seems also that although the reasons for this are clearly his own actions and an inability to deal with demands for judicial transparency, that opposition within Scotland, including from the always excellent Peter Kirby blog, has certainly influenced this. So it does show just how much influence well-directed questions and well-directed reporting of the truth can have.
Okay, and just to summarise that, this gentleman, Lord Gill, was basically he didn't want judges to have to declare their interests. Is that the basis of his resignation?
Well, that's part of it. Peter Kirby had put a petition into the Petitions Committee in Parliament asking for a register of judicial interests. Lord Gill was adamant that this was not going to happen. And in fact, not only was it not going to happen, he wasn't even willing to discuss it. And he refused an invitation to appear before Parliament to discuss this matter, basically saying that even discussing this with elected representatives would be an unheralded infringement of his independence. And he refused to appear. So he was very much dismissive of all these claims and requests for transparency, and was simultaneously saying, well, we have all the protection we need. It's called the judicial oath. Now, I'd have to point out, when I wrote to Lord Gill citing the judicial oath and pointing out how the judicial oath had been failed in several important regards by one of his judges, Sheriff Principal Bowen, in the trial of Robert Greene, I didn't get really very far. I got one very dismissive short letter which didn't address any of the points raised. So there was no indication that I could see that the office of Lord Gill was really taking the judicial oath seriously. The oath itself, if honoured, is in fact really quite first rate. But the question is that sufficient in this day and age to protect the public from abuse by the judiciary? And a lot of people in Scotland think it is not.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, Mike, what's happening with devolution?
Devolution. Well, if we go back to the day of the referendum result in Scotland, David Cameron had this to say. He said, "The people of Scotland have spoken. It's a clear result. They have kept our nation of 4 nations together, our country of 4 nations together. Like millions of other people, I'm delighted. As I said during the campaign, it would have broken my heart to see our United Kingdom come to an end." And he did emphasise our. I'm going to ask the question, what does that mean, in a second. He went on to say, "So now is the time for our United Kingdom to come together and move forward. A vital part of that will be a balanced settlement, fair to the people of Scotland, and importantly to everyone in England, Wales and Northern Ireland as well. I'm a passionate believer in our United Kingdom. I wanted more than anything for our United Kingdom to stay together, but I'm also a Democrat. We now have a chance, a great opportunity to change the way the British people are governed and change it for the better." For whom, I ask? "It is absolutely right that a new and fair settlement for Scotland should be accompanied by a new fair settlement that applies to all parts of our United Kingdom." And he then went on to say, "It is also important we have a wider civic engagement about to improve governance in our United Kingdom, including how to empower our great cities." And we will say more about this in the coming days. So it's all about our United Kingdom. And here we go. Here's something that was tweeted out by the Prime Minister earlier today. "More powers. The new mix of powers will give Scottish Parliament a range of choice over policies while retaining the strength and security of the UK, our united future." So, Brian, who is us? And I'm going to ask David this as well.
Well,
who are we?
When I hear this expression, to me, this is absolutely the establishment. I'm going to use that expression, talking. This is nothing to do with a word being used to represent ordinary people in UK or the electorate. This is a special group of people talking, and I think we're starting to see who that special group is very clearly. David's just given us a great picture on it by saying, well, of course, you can't challenge these people. If you challenge them, you end up in a psychiatric unit. these are the future leaders, and they're now saying us.
Yeah.
It's our United Kingdom.
Do you agree with that, David?
It was certainly a strange response from David Cameron. It moved the goalposts quite significantly away from the debate that had actually been happening, because what the people of Scotland voted for was obviously no change. And what he immediately said is, oh, great, thank you very much for that. I am a Democrat, therefore everything will change in Scotland and across the rest of the UK. Now, that was a little surprising, particularly when you consider that it was David Cameron who vetoed a 3-option referendum between no change, independence, and a third option, Devo Max, or full fiscal autonomy, or home rule within the UK, something of that description. So he vetoed that and forced, apparently Salmond was okay with this, was willing to have a 3-option referendum. And it was David Cameron who said, no, it must be in or out of the UK. Now, it would be very likely that Scotland would have selected that middle option. I think most people recognise that. He excluded that option, and then immediately after the no vote, seemed to suggest that that option, but applied across the whole UK, was actually what was going to be done. So it does seem that there's an agenda here which has not been driven by public opinion or by votes, but has been driven by something else, something less clear.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, Nick, just bring up the graphic again, if you could, there for a second, because here is David Cameron arriving today to meet Nicola Sturgeon, because, well, they're best of buddies and they are pushing forward with this agenda. So here's what he had to say today then. I am here to underline my commitment to our United Kingdom and Scotland's important place within it. That means remaining true to the promise we made to implement the All-Party Smith Agreement and to make Scotland one of the most accountable and powerful devolved parliaments in the world. As more powers are devolved to Scotland, it is time to move beyond the debate and about processes. Beyond the debate about processes and focus on those bread and butter issues that affect every family in our United Kingdom: jobs, homes, good schools, and strong public services, and dignity and respect in retirement. Now, I'm fascinated about this language again, dignity and respect in retirement, because of course dignity is used most commonly these days when discussing death, and I'm just wondering whether retirement has another meaning in this case. But as he said, just past the referendum, he mentioned cities, and here we've got FT today pushing, you mentioned this yesterday, Brian, pushing Manchester, UK's new order. And in fact, I'm going to say that this is clearly policy now that we're going to set up a series of city-states in the United Kingdom. But it's not just the UK's new order. This is going to be a global new form of governance. And in fact, here is the recent, one of the speeches from the recent CSE leaders meeting. We covered this at the time that the CSE leaders conference was taking place. It's a week of meetings of 100 of the top so-called leaders run by Common Purpose and CSC leaders from around the Commonwealth. And what they were discussing was specifically this issue of cities and particularly smart cities. Now at AV6 over this weekend, Pippa King is going to be talking about this issue, and we'll give the ad for that in a moment. But who else was speaking at this? Well, of course, because CSC leaders is coming out of the royal family, and particularly Prince Philip. His daughter is there pushing this agenda, and also, unsurprisingly perhaps, the Lord Mayor of London, Boris himself, yeah. Pushing this notion of devolution to cities. So we are going to keep our United Kingdom together by breaking it apart, as we've made that point many times now this week. And it's going to be done in a very smart way.
Indeed. And I'll just say how remarkable it is that, of course, we're now seeing the Common Purpose agenda really coming to the surface. So although we achieved a great deal in the basic exposure of Common Purpose, we had the complete lies by the Conservative Party. So we had Mr. Eric Pickles telling local councils you shouldn't get involved with Common Purpose. Meanwhile, he knew perfectly well that David Cameron was fully promoting Common Purpose at that time, in particular by attending events in India. But this is the agenda, city-states. This is part of the Agenda 21, take people away from the land and get them into cities where they can be controlled, breaking surface very quickly. What can we do about it? Well, it requires knowledge. People have to understand what's happening around them. And once you understand what's happening, it's very simple. We have to stay together, help our not only our friends and families, but our neighbours as well. And what better example than Mr. Tom Crawford? Now, we did report on this case, Tom Crawford against Bradford and Bingley, who were trying to repossess his house. There was a little bit of confusion as to what the result of the court case was. We maintain we did report it correctly yesterday. However, we do have, hopefully, a clip of video where you can hear from in Tom's own words, what exactly took place and what the result from the court hearing was.
I'll read out the judgment, and we were trying to explain to Nottingham Post, the young girl there, what it actually meant, because you think you're reading English here. It's not English at all, it's this legalese nonsense that they taught. And the majority of people go, oh, that's it, and all done. So, I can't find my glasses. So. The very last order that Godsmark made, that's a judge, he says, the order that I make is that permission to appeal out of time is granted. So he's given me, or us, permission to appeal. And then he goes on, but permission to appeal is refused. Now, can you understand that? So he's giving me permission to appeal, and then he's saying permission to appeal is refused. So the majority of people think, that's nonsense, and so you've lost. Then he goes on to say that the suspension of execution of the warrant of possession is lifted. So you think, right, so the warrant now is active and they can come after home. That's what it reads, but that's not what it actually means. Now I'll explain. He's given me, or us, permission to appeal, so there's merit in our case, or he wouldn't give it to us. The reason why he's not giving us permission to appeal is because there's nothing to appeal. And the reason why there's nothing to appeal is like saying you've gone to the bus stop and the bus isn't there, and you go to the station and say, I've missed the bus and it should have left, but the bus hasn't even started, so you haven't missed it. The reason is that this document here that they served on us, which is totally fraudulent, claim for possession, is a fraudulent document, and I'll show you why. By in his judgment, he says this, and this is the most important part. Now I've got to go to it. 91. Yeah, 91. Here we go. 91. He says this. Here, Mr. Crawford has a point. I can find nothing in the statement of accounts which show when capitalisation have occurred, although the total mortgage debt figures are more readily understandable from January, blah, 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 blah. At the time of commencement of the possession of proceedings, arrears were said to be £1,802. And this is the most important part. That is not a figure which I could identify from the statements of account. When asked, this is the barrister, where it came from, Miss Sandals for Bradford and Bingley told me it came from the computer. Right, now this is the bit, this is the nearest you ever get to a judge calling a barrister a liar. He said, as computers should be our slaves and not our masters, such a response is not satisfactory. So they went after a house on figures that can't be proved. Now, the other part is, in that claim for possession, which isn't a claim, but we'll say that for just now, they had a statement of truth. That statement of truth comes under Practice Direction 22, Statements of Truth. Basically it's saying, if an applicant wishes to rely on matters set out on this application notice as evidence, the applicant must be, the notice must be verified by a statement of truth. And then it goes on that you'll be in contempt of court if you put a false statement in. And then it also comes under Archibald, and this is common law, that is CPR Part 22. Under Archibald, it says, I don't have my glasses here, there's a little print, but it is contempt. It is contempt fraudulent to share the process. What's that?
It's not yours,
Actually, I've got no glasses.
Dad, do you want me to read it?
Hold on, no, I'll do it from memory. It is contempt fraudulently abuse of process of a court. For instance, when making a pleading, a court, by commencing an action or pleading a defence known to be false, is a contempt of court. The contempt of court is a jailable offence. Bradford and Bingley, their solicitors, wrote this just before court. In the circumstances and given out that our clients do not intend to make an application for costs. Have you ever heard of these creatures ever not turning up a payday? And they should have been here today to get another 10 to 15,000. We do not intend to attend the hearing. The reason why they didn't attend, because the judge could have thrown the book at them for contempt of court, jailed them. They weren't asking for costs because they weren't getting costs. And the whole thing is, because fraud from the outset, ab initio, makes everything null and void. So there is no possession order to appeal against. So you can't appeal against something that never happened. So now you understand it?
Okay, well, as we've just mentioned, AV6 starts, well, in fact, we're meeting tonight in the Daventry Hotel. Just before we play the ad, Ian just asked me to let everybody know that the free tickets that were mentioned on yesterday's programme have now been allocated, so there's no more opportunity for that, unfortunately. But anybody that's still wanting to go, there are still tickets available. So we'll play the ad and we'll see you in a minute or so.
So I've been watching and 9/11 was just an incredible mind control event. You know, it was apparent to me then, as it is today, that people are literally mind controlled, that they're not actually thinking for themselves. Most of us are simply regurgitating.
We live in a bubble, and a lot of times, until you remove yourself from that bubble, you don't even know you're living in a bubble, in a kind of an information prison in the West.
But these guys have got a lot of money, and we complain about McDonald's and all that sort of thing. Do you know why they've got so much money? Because we fucking buy their shit. So it's time to stop it. People say to me, where do we go? What's the first step? Stop supporting the companies that don't give a shit.
Be who you are. Don't police your thoughts and don't police your expression. Express yourself, but work for something positive. Express yourself in a positive way, Create a better world because you're in it. Now, what is your legacy that you leave behind? Is the world better because you were here? Or is it worse because you were here? Or did you just not participate? Because you have to participate, you really do.
A latecomer to the agenda for AV6, in fact, is you.
In this case, it is. Just a quick look. I was kindly invited by Ian Crane to speak at the event. Will be kicking off. I hope to get the bottoms on seats. This was the actual subject. We're going to have a look at Beyond Authority, Election Fraud and the Rush to Communitarianism. So anybody who wants to read that in detail can obviously freeze the screen and have a look. But essentially, I picked up on the fact that journalist Peter Hitchens wrote a very good piece a few days ago saying that he never for a moment imagined that big money and big lies could so successfully scare, cajole and diddle the electorate of this country. He goes on to say he grew up in a better place. But what he did say is that the campaign was dishonest and crude. And I've said, well, I agree with everything he said, apart from the fact it was not crude. The general election campaign was the outcome of years of conspiring to build a common purpose in which those whom we trusted to lead, govern and protect us were carefully chosen and groomed to act beyond their authority and betray us. And the key bit is I pointed out that it was the chief executive of political charity Common Purpose that said way back in 2007 that Downing Street was always wondering whether people had sufficient guile to be brought into a coalition they were building. So how did she know? Well, of course, she knew because her organisation had been working in the office of the Deputy Prime Minister in order to drive the Common Purpose agenda through the Lib Lab Con. So if you're interested in that and you haven't bought a ticket, perhaps you might consider coming to AV6. But of course, many other good speakers putting the package together. Well, before we leave you today, let's have a look at how governments like to work. Fear and mind control is a part of that. And of course, it's the Conservative government that's been boasting of having an embedded behavioural change unit using NLP in order to influence the way we think and behave. But the other big agenda that's being used by the government at the moment, of course, is fear of Russia, and who better to help promote this than the BBC? And this was something that they came up with a little while ago, but they were saying that because the Russians were flying military flights close to UK, we were about to come under nuclear attack, and here is the BBC pushing out how to spot a Russian bomber. We said very clearly this was simply fear-mongering. And we reminded people that it's the UK column alone that has done the analysis on subversion carried out by the BBC to unsettle foreign states, including, of course, Syria, but also we focused on Kazakhstan. So if you haven't read that article, look at it. Why have we got this up? Well, of course, back in the press, we've got scaremongering over Russian aircraft, the Bear. Let's bring one up on screen. Here we are. A big reconnaissance aircraft, but capable of firing nuclear missiles. Suddenly, flights that have been taking place for years should terrify us, and every launch of NATO planes is to be reported. Now, let's have a look in this article and see what was said, because we're going to comment in a bit more detail. Well, they kindly said at no time did the Russian military aircraft cross into UK sovereign airspace. They said the Bear bombers were not considered a threat at any time. However, what RAF sources have said the would-be attack was a training exercise. Now, we think there's a bit of an oxymoron in there because it's a training exercise, but apparently it's a would-be attack. So there's some very interesting reporting. Let's add a bit more. One of the Bears intercepted previously in April was carrying a nuclear weapon, although it was not armed. And we challenge this statement absolutely. How could they possibly know that the weapon was not armed? Where did this information come from? Where did all of this nonsense come from? Well, let's have a look down at the bottom, because here we are. We are back to acclaimed journalist and self-named hack, his terminology, not mine, Peter Henn. Where did we last report him? Well, we'll come on to that, but let's remind ourselves, here he is boasting of coming out of nowhere to work with the Express and the Mail He calls himself a hack. He's happy to use foul language on his Twitter page. What does he know about defence? Well, we think not a lot, but of course this is the man that the Express used to fill an article full of experts that were never defined or identified. So this is the pitiful state of national reporting in UK, and backed up by these sorts of reports. Here's Sir Adrian Bradshaw, General, NATO's Deputy Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. Russian tensions could escalate into all-out war. And as one of our knowledgeable viewers said, this is what you get when you bleed the Foreign and Commonwealth Office Eastern Research Group of 80% of his experienced Russian hands. What this person was saying is this is misleading, inaccurate propaganda. And what are we seeing? A close down of the military. UK column's been told that the Conservatives are now executing another massive cut, 10% at least, which will result in the loss of 30,000 personnel. And despite ramping up fear of terrorism, Russian aggression, Cameron's also approved a massive sell-off of military equipment. And we can tell you that chiefs of staff and other senior military officers are understood to be deeply concerned. Tight for time, let's have a look at those concerns. Well, this is a key one. These chiefs of the military staff say that basically their professional opinion on risks to Britain's defence is being sidelined by unqualified civil servants acting beyond authority. Informed sources are also telling us that the senior military are bemused by the sudden announcement of the purchase of the US P-8 maritime patrol aircraft, and they say Cameron scrapped the Nimrods, we didn't know about it, now he's bringing in this aircraft, we don't know what's happening. And they're also deeply concerned about the encroachment of French military influence in the British military and strategic defence matters, including, we understand, the use of tactical nuclear weapons. So Britain's military chiefs not in charge anymore because Cameron's brought in the French. And nonetheless, apparently David Cameron and his defence ministers have been warned that the speed with which modern threats arise cannot be mitigated by saying you're going to buy equipment in the future. And it goes on because they're concerned about the lack of operational air cover for the fleet. We've got a new aircraft carrier, but no aircraft for it. And the F-35, the American plane, looking pretty unserviceable at the moment. And they've also got concerns that the cuts are going to lead to an unviable level of military performance in face of any European threat, to which Mr. Cameron says, well, don't worry, our friends, the French, are going to help out. And lastly, it's been reported that senior military personnel are very curious as to the role of the Franco-British Council in helping to determine Britain's last strategic defence review. So there we are.
Can I say something about this?
Indeed.
Because if there are any UKIP members watching this, of course, we're possibly going to end up with an in-out referendum in the not-too-distant future. And of course, at the same time, we're having all these military cuts. So what is going on here? Well, many people in Europe are freely openly commenting that in return for guarantees from Europe with regard to migration, which may have an effect on an in-out referendum, Cameron is going to have to bring Britain into the full European army. Now, this is something that the UK column has been talking about for quite a long time, but it's now being openly discussed in Europe. So he's cutting the UK military with a view, I think, to us
levering in the European army. Effectively. We're very tight for time. If you've nothing to add, we'll just end by taking a look at our treasonous Prime Minister, David Cameron. This was a Telegraph picture of him visiting the Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier build site. I just wanted to put over the top of it, UK column article, the Franco-British Council plan to destroy Britain's military capability. And let's remember what we said here. Just need some glasses for this. We're to be stripped of the military power to act alone. Our military command and control structures are to be weakened and confused by French collaboration and partnering, and we are to be stripped of nuclear weapons. The security of Britain is being destroyed under the cloak of Cameron's Franco-British Defence Treaty. And that was written way back in 2011, and we say that it is only the UK column that is putting out the correct warning of the dangers of this duplicitous government at the moment. Final comment from you, David, if you would be so kind, 15 seconds, and then we must close.
Yes, well, as I mentioned before, in the run-up to the First World War, there was a lot of public and, worse, secret associations with the French government and French military, associations that not even the British cabinet was fully aware of, and it didn't go well for this country. And I am reminded of the fact that the only lesson we learn from history is that we don't learn any lessons from history. And I view all of these things as very concerning indeed.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us. And the weather was in Rhondda. I think we had some sunshine in Rhondda, so apologies if I missed you off, but there we are. Thanks for joining us. Troubled times. Get out there, talk, do things, act. We'll be back on Tuesday. Delay on Monday because of the AV6 conference. We'll be back on Tuesday at 1 o'clock. Look forward to seeing you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.